Good evening, I'm David Nicholas, and next here on CMU Public Television, State Senator Judy Emmons joins me here on Capitol Report.
Welcome to Capitol Report, a weekly discussion with your elected officials on the issues and concerns that affect you.
Thanks again. As always, good to have you here as we welcome back to our program State Senator Judy Emmons, Republican from Sheridan, currently serving in her first term, representing the 33rd District. Senator, welcome back to our program.
I'm glad to be back, Dave. Thank you for having me.
As we sit down today, a couple of major issues that have seen action over a period of time. The first one in particular that seems to be coming to some culmination, and it is, to broadly phrase it, the drug testing for those on assistance. What can you tell us about where the debate took us to now, what seems to be a final resolve on this?
Interestingly, this has been an issue through the years, quite frankly, but this year managed to get a House bill out of the House and a comparable Senate bill. Some differences in the process and procedures and looking at issues where perhaps folks receiving cash assistance are using drugs and their children may be at risk of not getting all of the money allocated toward them. So the goal of the bill, as it came out of the Senate yesterday, was to make sure that the children get the assistance that they deserve and that we are allocating as a government and as citizens who are paying those taxes. And there was an amendment put on that if in case the parents are found to be using drugs, then the children would, the money allocated for them would go perhaps to a relative, a third party, whereby they don't lose that, but the children are covered and get their help.
No doubt you've already, I'm sure, heard some of the expected criticism, perhaps reports in some sections of the media about the nature of legislation like this. You brought up the fact that we are talking about taxpayer dollars, but the perception perhaps that certain people are being stigmatized, stereotyped, and so forth. How do we balance that perception to put forth the intent of what the legislation is meant to do?
It's tricky. It's very tricky, and of course, you know, you allocate with the best of intentions. Certainly there are folks out there on assistance who may have a card, a marijuana card that they are concerned about, worried that that might be considered an issue when they are receiving cash assistance. So there's also a clause in there that protects if it's not illegal, if they're not using a substance illegally, that protects individuals who are card-carrying individuals. But certainly you don't want to stigmatize anyone. But a concern really is, a great concern is for the children, to make sure that their parents are not utilizing what was intended to cover needs of the children.
I'm glad you brought up the tie-in potentially to the medical marijuana. There was also the recent now addition of PTSD as to the conditions that would be allowed for the treatment under that. And in the recent discussions we've had on this program, it's just one more example of how that bill, that ballot proposal passed in all 83 counties, left the state with really an open-ended, undefined, one court challenge after another. As we sit down today, where do you assess that the handle we're getting on controlling it, making sense out of all it, and making it work for what seemed to be the intent for which it was written?
Well, it was broadly written, and that's been an issue for the entire state, simply because each jurisdiction, each municipality, they have enacted what they believe is workable for their area. You know, Canada, it's much more defined, it's much more controlled. The only place it's grown in Canada is one location under lock and key and fence and lights and everything else, almost like imprisonment for marijuana. And very, very much controlled as to the type and quality of marijuana. So we are far from that here in Michigan, and I believe at some point we will have to make some adjustments. There have been legislation introduced in the House. I believe there's some in the Senate now. Some has come over from the House to the Senate. I believe it's in Judiciary Committee. But it's all over the board, and that's probably not a good thing.
Did groups that were in support of this initially come to lawmakers and say, give us a bill? Or was this, because sometimes we hear that those situations are done and we hear of lawmakers reacting saying, okay, good idea, but not as written, or in some cases, quite frankly, the legislature has not wanted to go down the road of certain things, and then we find it going down the road of the ballot proposal, and those sometimes give us good things, or in this case, something that has proved to be the situation that it is.
And sometimes you vote on a ballot proposal not realizing exactly what you're voting upon. And the ballot language is supposed to be truthful and hopefully clear, but sometimes, as in this case, it was so broadly written, you didn't realize it was going to be broadly imposed. I don't recall prior to that ballot proposal whether any group pursued legislation. But certainly since then, there have been issues brought forward.
Now, we have seen with the issue of the wolf hunt where issue raised, referendum, competing bill, let's make certain things referendum proof, and this process kind of going back forth in the politics of Lansing. Given this medical marijuana issue, is there anything that the legislature can do to go to then State Board of Canvassers in that body and doing the job they're supposed to do that puts any more stipulation on whether or not language passes the test and then goes on to the ballot? Is there any way we can get a better set of magnifying glasses on this, or whatever the case may be?
Well, I think people have good intent when they come forward with their ballot language, and some cases, such as these that are as broad as they are, then it's up to the legislature to tighten them up or make them workable or make it something that can actually be implemented. And I'm not sure you can do that prior to the ballot proposal being voted upon. They go, and that's a good thing. I mean, it's citizen-driven government, and that's what we like here in America.
Another measure that the Senate took up and is addressed is the bills that aim to crack down on the sales of scrap metal from stolen materials and car parts. Anticipating, as we sit down, the signature of the governor, we think of it as a problem in the urban areas, but even on the phone, and there's some discussion in the analysis of this, that it has also been an area, a problem area in some of the rural parts of the state. Your district would be much more reflective of that. Too simplistic to say that crime is crime, whether we're talking urban or rural, or are there certain different circumstances when we see this happening in the rural areas that separate it from the cities?
Well, it's all about finding scrap metal that you're taking from somebody else or they are utilizing for business purposes more than likely, and selling it. It's quick, easy cash, and that has been a concern. It's really ginned up in the last few years when the price of metal increased across the board. You're talking about catalytic converters, you're talking about copper wire, you're talking about air conditioners, aluminum. And for the rural areas, it's catalytic converters all across the state, but for the rural areas, what we're looking at a lot of the times are center pivots in irrigation in the field. And in our part of Michigan, there are a lot of irrigation lines. And I can't tell you, we have a lot of potatoes in this general area, a lot of sugar beets, a lot of irrigation on those particular crops. And we have farmers who've been hit over and over and over again. So
it's out there on the equipment in the field. People may
Absolutely.
not know that, as opposed to breaking into a building, getting down to the basement, going after an old boiler or something like that.
Right. Or, and of course in the urban areas, it's abandoned buildings that have been stripped. Pretty much, I would bet most of them have been stripped. But in rural areas, you're talking about, and if you're from a rural area, you pretty well know. I mean, the thieves are very good at what they do. Our prosecutors are frustrated, and they will go in, they'll strip those center pivots clean of wire, and there's a lot of wire in those. And then you go to use it, and it doesn't work. So I think this will be helpful. Will it solve it completely? Probably not, but you know, they're required, a scrap dealer is going to be required, if it's over $25 worth of metal, they'll be required to send a check, a money order, some form of payment, and send it in a 3-day period, so that in that interim time, the individual who brought it will be photographed when they drop it off, and you will have a record of that individual. They'll have to show ID. And I believe, I'm hopeful that this will make a difference. And all the law enforcement folks that I've talked to are hopeful too.
We bring up once again the ever-popular road funding issue.
It's a perpetual issue, isn't it?
It has been, and as we have now started to see the thaw, it's probably going to continue to be. How is some of that money that's been allocated through the emergency portions and then projecting into the money set aside in that mid-year funding bill for the projects into the summer? How are those going to be utilized in your district?
Well, every one of our road commission supervisors have been in touch with me, and early on, I mean, we realized from the depth of the snow and the propensity of time after time after time, we knew that they were struggling to meet their needs as far as making sure that they weren't going to be laying off a lot of people this summer and trying to meet the summer needs. It was a long, hard winter, and not only do our roads show it, but our road commissions have been affected, and the staff, as well as what they're trying to do just to keep maintenance and repairs. So we fought for this. We felt there was going to have to be some way to address the issues for especially our rural counties, but all counties in Michigan, because it just was across the board, you know, unheard of for many, many years to have a winter like this and this severe.
Back to refresh people's memories somewhat on what the governor had called for most directly last year, the $1.2 billion per year over a 10-year period. Was that design, or that proposal that he would still call for, does that fully address bringing us all the way up to where we should be? Does that look at maintenance? What does that amount do in context?
If I understand it, and you know, certainly the roads have deteriorated over the winter, but at that point in time, I think they thought it would get us a good start to get us some repairs and rebuilds of roads across the state. We're probably looking at more, especially if you get some ice flows bumping into bridges and things like that. It's been harder on some of those as well. So that was a good start. We're going to have to reevaluate this.
Your colleague, Senator Howard Walker out of Traverse City, has called for an elimination of the taxes on gas in exchange for a 1% across the board increase to the sales tax. As we have learned in this discussion about the money from gas tax or sales tax applied to gas and that money going to schools, it's brought up this tug of war between funding that we see as maybe a shortfall for the roads because it's going to the schools. If we direct it to the roads, then we have a reduction to the school aid fund that we would have to take care of. His proposal then, knowing that we're talking about commercial activity, people spending money to put it in place, do you think that it's workable as proposed, and would it put money more directly equal to or increase when it comes to roads and schools?
Oh, that's a good question, and that's probably a good way to look at it and try to
Do you have
evaluate.
a calculator? Can we project
my
it out, or a
goodness.
crystal ball maybe?
And you know, you do your best when proposals like this come forward. Actually, I haven't heard a great many, and not many folks are aware of, you know, the variety that are out there. When the governor announced his proposal, everybody kind of got on the horn and let us know what they think. This one we haven't heard a whole lot about, although when I talk to people and I just lay out some of the options, they do like a proposal where it increases sales tax. And it just, To many folks, it seems fairer. You're covering a lot of folks across the board. Certainly, you're going to grab the tourists when they come into the state, and not that they don't buy fuel too, but they buy other things as well. So I think there's some serious discussion going on now. We all are aware of the condition of the roads, and serious discussion among those, especially those in the transportation committees and the governor's folks, to come up with something. Because I just hesitate to say, but every person driving a vehicle on Michigan roads probably is going to have some kind of damage or other to their vehicle because of the condition.
If we sit, especially from this vantage point right in the middle of the state, and we look to those states around us, how do we compare right now? At 6%, how does it stack up to Illinois, to Indiana, to Ohio, those surrounding areas, so that if we are proposing something like this, and people say, oh, we don't want to spend more, but does it bring us more in potential, compliance? And then, as you say, bringing in potentially those that are coming in via tourism.
Well, I think sales tax, our 6%, I still think it is one of the lower ones. I know Illinois is higher. Can't give you exact numbers for the surrounding states, but we aren't any lower, I don't think, than any average. I mean, we are low compared to those around us, and probably it seems to be one of those choices that people make that was kind of like Proposal A back years ago. It was a trade-off. You traded off your property tax increases versus a sales tax increase, and to get it somewhat of a leveling of property taxes. In this case, the most important thing you want to keep in mind is, are you going to see results and value for the dollars that you're spending? If you increase your sales tax by 1%, you really want to see some value for that, and people should demand that.
That's 1993. This is 2014. I mean, things have changed a lot. So is it too far out of the box to look at maybe making a shift in one of those directions?
It's interesting. When you make a shift like that, and it really was. It was a piece where you changed one tax for another type of tax, and that seems to appeal to people most of the time, if it makes sense to them, and they do see the value.
Farm bill is passed. Michigan Farm Bureau, as we sit down today, is back now from meeting with federal lawmakers in Washington, D.C. Your district and your background very much tied to agriculture. What is the state overall of the industry, the particular challenges, the shape of where we see things going, especially now with a 5-year farm bill in place? How does that play out statewide, and what we might see here at home?
Well, it probably it gives some continuity, and people in production agriculture and those involved in the markets, something they can count on, that they know where it's going for the next few years, and there's some continuity there. The state of agriculture right now, certainly a couple years ago, the fruits were devastated, and they recovered somewhat. They're again concerned this year because of just the unique winter. It's going to remain to be seen. Wheat, I think, has been impacted. The price of wheat went up when Ukraine was invaded, and that's a great wheat growing region over there. And so things like that, much more volatile markets because of the international markets. But for Michigan, our beauty is the diversity of agriculture in Michigan. And then you go back to the road situation and say, but you got to get those crops to the markets, and you got to get them out to the export markets, and most all of it goes over our roads. So everything is linked to everything else.
Everything's interconnected, that's right. March Madness underway too, and this year the event is going to be in Dallas. Brings us to one of your primary concentrations that we've talked about before, and that's looking at the issue of human trafficking. Events like the Super Bowl, the Final Four in basketball bring a lot of people into these major areas for a lot of economic boom, but it also is the backdrop to the increase in trafficking. What have you heard about what Dallas may be doing to look at that? I mean, as from your position of advocacy to address it here, what do you see your potential counterparts doing in other areas when we're talking about a big event like this?
Well, it's heartening for me in that law enforcement and primarily Homeland Security has taken a great lead on this and really ramped it up. But everyone is much more aware, and there's much more to do, but there's great awareness. And we saw some great results from our North American Auto Show, some of the initiatives that were undertaken with Teresa Flores, her soap program, whereby you bring soaps to hotels where they offer soaps in their restrooms in each room, and on the back of that soap is a sticker, and it says, are you here under duress? Are you being forced to do things that you don't want to do? And if an individual has an opportunity to see that bar of soap, on that bar is listed the human trafficking hotline. It's a national hotline. It covers from any state, it doesn't matter where you are, and it goes into the Polaris Project in Washington, D.C. The number is 888-3737, 888, and they will take whatever information comes in on that hotline and disseminate it to the law enforcement units whereby the location is. And there has been significant repercussions, some significant arrests, because they do see great increase in the phone call numbers during situations such as the Super Bowl or NCAA Final Four or North American Auto Show, even our prize in Grand Rapids.
I'm glad you also referred to the Polaris Project, because there was a report I just saw this week, and they were looking at some figures in a period through mid to late of the 2000s. They were highlighting cities like Dallas, where, as we noted, the Final Four is going to be Atlanta, Denver, Miami, Kansas City, San Diego, Seattle, and Washington. You think conventions, you think sporting events, major events coming to those cities, ranging between 39.9 million and 290 million of the underground sex economy. For all that you cited in the good news, I don't want to dampen that, but those numbers still seem rather staggering for what is potentially still going on out there.
They are. And it's one of those crimes where the victim doesn't have a voice. Drugs come into play. And quite frankly, many of those first responders, law enforcement, aren't aware of what they're watching for. They may see signs but not recognize signs. And it's just even the common citizen. When we have had citizens, truckers oftentimes see things and will call them in. There have been rings broken because a trucker just trusted his gut instinct. Something just didn't look right, and he made the phone call. And then the investigation continued after that. But those are staggering numbers. There are staggering numbers of individuals out there, and it's so far under the radar. It's many times internet-driven. You don't really see the perpetrator who is selling the human being. And that's the goal. We ultimately have to enact legislation that goes after the person buying and the person selling.
We're inside our last couple of minutes for the conversation today, but I did want to give you a chance to look at, from the committee vantage point, specific legislation or other things that you may be in support of, anything that right now is perhaps going to be coming to more of an active role in terms of the legislative process here in the next couple of weeks.
Well, of course, the budget's always going to consume a lot of the attention the next few weeks. And, there have been some back and forth, how much school aid for our K-12 districts. The Senate came out this week out of their subcommittee for education and increased it, would help areas like ours where we have lower funded districts to narrow the gap between the higher funded and the lower funded. And it also increased the per pupil funding. So I was encouraged with that from Senator Walker's. He chairs that subcommittee. And for our committee in particular, our goal is to wrap up a lot of these human trafficking bills. We have some sitting on the Senate floor, we have some now over in the House, and we have additional bills that will address some of the foster care issues of individuals being trafficked from that venue. So our goal is to clean that up and get as many, we really want to get this particular package done before we lose any more time.
That does get into, in our final moment here, that that age-old political question of what gets addressed and what sometimes gets delayed in an election year. Do you see those bills in particular being wrapped up before things get into the thick of and other priorities come up?
I
and so
do.
forth?
I do. I think pretty much people understand it, they're motivated, and they realize that what we have here in Michigan is a very simplistic law right now, and we need more tools for our law enforcement, for our prosecutors, and these bills will start the process. And I'm going to guess as we learn more, we'll realize that more is needed. But right now, we're focused on these.
Well, we'll watch the progress of those, and as you said, then the work on those elements and pieces of the budget as well in the days and weeks to come. Thanks for the update on where things stand now. Always good to see you. Thanks.
Always good to see you too. Thank you.
And thanks very much for your time and attention, too. We've been speaking with State Senator Judy Emmons from Sheridan, the Republican serving the 33rd District. This program will be seen again in our overnight rotation tonight and very soon posted to the website where all of the programs from this current season can be found. Click on WCMU.org and the TV button, and then to WCMU Productions, and the link is there to the Capitol Report page. Thanks to Chris Ogazali and all of our crew here. I'm David Nicholas. Thanks again for your time, and have a good week.
You've been watching Capitol Report. Join us again as your elected officials speak to your concerns on current issues.